But we're going on a road trip. Nadia knew. Oh, okay. They took off in three big long-range rovers. Nadia and five of the geologists, and Simon, George, Phyllis, and Edvard. George and Edvard were friends of Phyllis's from their NASA days, and they supported her in advocating applied geological studies, meaning prospecting for rare metals. Simon, on the other hand, was a quiet ally of Anne's, committed to pure research and a hands-off attitude. Nadia knew all of this, even though she had spent very little time alone with any of these people, except for Anne. But talk was talk. She could have named all the allegiances of everyone at base if she had to. The expedition rovers were composed of two four-wheeled modules, coupled by a flexible frame. They looked a bit like giant ants. They had been built by Rolls-Royce and a multinational aerospace consortium, and had a beautiful sea green finish. The forward modules contained the living quarters and had tinted windows on all four sides. The aft modules contained the fuel tanks and sported a number of black rotating solar panels. I believe that's what this is a picture of. Sweet. Yeah, those are the rotating solar panels and the fuel. Oh, I see it is kind of green. I mean, it's got green stripes too, but it's kind of sea green, I guess. Not what I was imagining, but we don't have to argue about the palette. And sported a number of black rotating solar panels. The 8 wire mesh wheels were 2.5 meters high and very broad. I like that this was written a long time ago, and they actually do use mesh wheels. Or I don't know when this was written, but I don't know like if mesh wheels had become the standard for rovers yet. I don't know. Or maybe it was. I just remember, the only thing I remember learning about was how they determined they wanted to use mesh wheels. Because I guess that makes sense. Because when we landed on the moon, yeah, this must have been decided in the 60s. I just thought the story was interesting about how they ended up figuring out what kind of wheel to use. Because they're like, you don't want to get a flat tire on the moon. So how do we stop that from happening? And one of the things that was engineered was like a giant mesh wheel that's made out of like some kind of metal. It's like a metal mesh, but it's like flexible. So you can literally just roll over whatever the fuck you want to, and you're never gonna get a puncture. And have all the air go out of your tire. Yeah, they're like, how do you prevent air leaving the tire? Don't use air. Eight wire mesh wheels were 2.5 meters high and very broad. As they headed across Lunae Planum, they marked their route with little green transponders, dropping one every few kilometers. They also cleared rocks from their paths that might disable a robot-driven rover, using the snowplow attachment or the little crane at the front end of the first rover. So, in effect, they were building a road. but they seldom had to use the rock-moving equipment on Lune. They drove northeast at nearly their full speed of 30 kilometers an hour for several days straight. They were heading northeast to avoid the canyon systems of Tempe and Mariotis, and this route took them down Lune to the long slope of Chrysi Planitia. Both these regions looked much like the land around their base camp, bumpy and strewn with small rocks. But because they were heading downhill, they often had much longer views than they were used to. It was a new pleasure to Nadia to drive on and see new countryside continually pop over the horizon. Hillocks, dips, enormous isolated boulders, the occasional low round mesa that was the outside of a crater. When they had descended to the lowlands of the northern hemisphere, they turned and drove straight north across the immense Acidalia Planitia. Acidalia Planitia. And again ran straight for several days. Their wheel tracks stretched behind them like the first cut of a lawnmower through grass, and the transponders gleamed bright and incongruous amongst the rocks. Phyllis, Edvard, and George talked about making a few side trips to investigate some indications seen in satellite photos that there were unusual mineral outcroppings near Perepelkin crater. Anne reminded them irritably of their mission. It made Nadia sad to see that Anne was nearly as distant and tense out here as she was back at base. Whenever the rovers were stopped, she was outside walking around alone, and she was with John when they sat together in Rover 1 to eat dinner. Occasionally Nadia tried to draw her out. Anne, how did all these rocks get scattered around like this? Meteors. But where are the craters? Most are in the south. But how did the rocks get here, then? Or how did the rocks get here, then? They flew. That's why they're so small. It's only smaller rocks that could be tossed so far. But I thought you told me that these northern plains were relatively new, while the heavy cratering was relatively old. That's right. The rocks you see here come from late meteor action. The total accumulation of loose rock from meteor strikes is much greater than what we can see. That's what's Well, that's right. The rocks that you see here come from late meteor action. The total accumulation of loose rock from meteor strikes is much greater than what we can see. That's what gardened regolith is. And the regolith is a kilometer deep. It's hard to believe, Nadia said. I mean, that's so many meteors. Anne nodded. It's billions of years. That's the difference between here and Earth. The age of the land goes from millions of years to billions. It's such a big difference, it's hard to imagine. But seeing stuff like this can really help. Midway across Acidalia, they began running into long, straight, steep-walled, flat-bottomed canyons. They looked, as George noted more than once, like the dry beds of legendary canals. Like the dry beds of the legendary canals. The geological name for them was fossae, and they came in clusters. Even the smallest of these canyons were impassable to rovers. And when they came on one, they had to turn and run along its rim until its floors rose or its walls drew together, and they could continue north over flat plain again. The horizon ahead was sometimes 20 kilometers off, sometimes 3. Craters became rare, and the ones they passed were surrounded by low mounds that rayed out from the rims. Splosh craters, where meteors had landed in permafrost that had turned to hot mud on impact. Nadia's companions spent a day wandering eagerly over the splayed hills around one of these craters. The rounded slopes, Phyllis said, indicated ancient water was... Ugh. It's hard to read. Craters became rare, and the ones that they passed were surrounded by low mounds that rayed out from the rims. Splosh craters, where meteors had landed in permafrost that had turned to hot mud on impact. Nadia's companions spent a day wandering eagerly over the splayed hills around one of these craters. The rounded slopes, Phyllis said, indicated ancient water as clearly as the grain in petrified wood indicated the original tree. By the way she spoke, Nadia understood that this was another one of her disagreements with Anne. Phyllis believed in the long, wet past model. Anne in the short, wet past model. Or Anne in the short, wet past. Or something like that. Science was many things, Nadia thought, including a weapon with which to hit other scientists. Further north, around latitude 54, they drove in to the weird-looking land of Thermokarst, hummocky terrain spotted by a great number of steep-sided oval pits called Alasses. I'll say Alasses. Steep-sided oval pits called Alasses. These Alasses were 100 times bigger than their Terran analogs, most of them 2 or 3 kilometers across, and about 60 meters deep. A sure sign of permafrost, the geologists all agreed. Seasonal freezing and thawing of the soil caused it to slump in this pattern. Pits this big indicated that water content in the soil must have been high, Phyllis said. Unless it was another manifestation of Martian timescales, Anne replied. Slightly icy soil, slumping ever so slightly for eons. Irritably, Phyllis suggested that they try collecting water from the ground, and irritably, Anne agreed. They found a smooth slope between depressions and stopped to install a permafrost water collector. Nadia took charge of the operation with a feeling of relief. The trip's lack of work had begun to get to her. It was a good day's job. She dug a 10-meter-long trench with the lead rover's little backhoe, laid the lateral collector gallery, a perforated stainless steel pipe filled with gravel, checked the electric heating elements running in strips along the pipe and filters, then filled in the trench with clay and rocks that they had dug out earlier. Over the lower end of the gallery was a sump and pump, and an insulated transport line leading to a small holding tank. Batteries would power the heating elements, and solar panels charged the battery. When the holding tank was full, if there was enough water to fill it, the pump would shut off and a solenoid valve would open, allowing the water in the transport line to drain back into the gallery, after which the heating elements would shut off as well. Almost done, Nadia declared late in the day as she started to bolt the transport pipe onto the last magnesium post. Her hands were dangerously cold, and her maimed hand throbbed. "Maybe someone could start dinner," she said. "I'm almost done here." The transport pipe had to be packed in a thick cylinder of white polyurethane foam, and then fitted into a larger protective pipe. Amazing how much insulation complicated a simple piece of plumbing. Hex nut, washer, cotton pin, a firm tug on the wrench. Nadia walked along the line, checking the coupling bands at the joints. Everything firm. She lugged her tools over to Rover 1, looked back at the result of the day's work. A tank, a short pipe on posts, a box on the ground, a long, low mound of disturbed soil running uphill. Looking raw but otherwise not unusual in this land of lumps. "We'll drink some fresh water on our way back," she said. Man, that would be awesome. I want to go to the lumpy space. Yum. Lumpy space is what Maya calls Nadia behind her back. Dude, I knew Maya was a bitch. No, I know, that's just mean. Lumpy Nine Fingers? Oh no, what if Maya and Arkady start dating and they start calling Nadia mean nicknames together? I don't think Nadia can handle it. I don't think the readers can handle it. Look, I'm already crying. Arkady wouldn't date Maya? I don't know about that. Maya already said she wouldn't date Arkady anyways. Okay. We'll drink some fresh water on our way back, she said. Maya handles rejecting by saying it was her idea all along. You know what that... Oh, wait, that is true. That's what I got from that paragraph as well. I guess you guys are right. I'm just imagining the worst. How fresh? Like freshly collected from the dirt fresh. They had driven north for over 2,000 kilometers and finally rolled down into Vastidus Borealis. Vastidus Borealis, an ancient cratered lava plain that ringed the northern hemisphere between latitude 60 and 70. Anne and the other geologists spent a couple of hours every morning out on the bare, dark rock of this plain, taking samples, after which they would drive north for the rest of the day, discussing what they had found. Anne seemed more absorbed in the work, happier. I want to go to an ancient lava plain. Anne seemed more absorbed in the work, happier. One evening, Simon pointed out that Phobos was running just over the low hills to the south. The next day's drive would put it just under the horizon. It was a remarkable demonstration of just how low the little moon's orbit was. They were only at latitude 69. Nice. But Phobos was only some 1,000 kilometers above the planet's equator. Nadia waved goodbye to it with a smile. She would still be able to talk to Arcady using the newly arrived aerosynchronous radio satellites. 3 days later, the bare rock ended, running under waves of blackish sand. Thank you, everybody. Giggity. They were only at latitude 69. But at least she can still talk to Arcady using the newly arrived aerosynchronous radio satellites. Actually, and we're on page 168. On purpose? Intentional? Question mark? Okay. 3 days later, the bare rock ended, running under waves of blackish sand. It was just like coming on the shore of a sea. I noticed in, like, older books, or at least, like, by a few decades, everybody says coming on. They don't really say coming upon something, like with came upon the sea. They always say coming on. Coming on a sea. That's just a minor example. I'm not sure that either is better. There's no good phrasing, I guess, in this year of 2024. Anyways, it was like coming on the shore of a sea. They had reached the great northern dunes, which wrapped the world in a band between Vastidus and the polar cap. Where they were going to cross, the band was about 800 kilometers wide. The dunes. And where they were going to cross, the band was about 800 kilometers wide. The sand was a charcoal color, tinged with purple and rose. A rich relief to the eye after all the red rubble of the south. The dunes trended north and south, in parallel crests that occasionally broke or merged. Driving over them was easy. The sand was hard-packed, and they only had to pick a big dune and run along its humpbacked western side. After a few days of this, however, the dunes got bigger, and became what Anne called Barcan Dunes. These looked like huge frozen waves, with faces 100 meters tall and backs a kilometer wide. And the crescent that each wave made was several kilometers long. And with so many other Martian, and as with so many other Martian landscape features, they were 100 times larger than their Terran analogs in the Sahara and Gobi. The expedition kept a level course over the backs of these great waves by contouring from one wave back to the next. Their rovers like tiny boats, paddle wheeling over a sea that had frozen at the height of a titanic storm. Everything is bigger on Mars, except the oceans. Wah wah. One day on this petrified sea, Rover 2 stopped. A red light on the control panel indicated the problem was in the flexible frame between the modules. And in fact, the rear module was tilted to the left, shoving the left side wheels into the sand. Nadia got into a suit and went back to have a look. She took the dust cover off the joint where the frame connected to the module chassis and found that the bolts holding them together were all broken. "This is going to take a while," Nadia said. "You guys might as well have another look around." Soon the suited figures of Phyllis and George emerged, followed by Simon and Anne and Edvard. Phyllis and George took a transponder from Rover 3 and set it out 3 meters to the right of their road. Nadia went to work on the broken frame, handling things as little as possible. It was a cold afternoon, perhaps 70 below, and she could feel the diamond chill right down to the bone. The ends of the bolts wouldn't come out of the side of the module, so she got out a drill and started drilling new holes. She began to hum the Sheik of Araby. Anne and Edvard and Simon were discussing sand. It was so nice, Nadia thought, to see ground that wasn't red. To hear Anne absorbed in her work. To have some work to do herself. They had almost reached the Arctic Circle. And it was LS-84, with the northern summer solstice only 2 weeks away. So the days were getting long. Nadia and George worked through the evening while Phyllis heated supper. Nadia and George worked through the evening while Phyllis heated supper. And after the meal, Nadia went back out to finish the job. The sun was red in a brown haze, small and round even though it was near setting. There wasn't enough atmosphere for oblation to enlarge and flatten it. Nadia finished, put her tools away, and had opened the outer lock door of Rover 1 when Anne's voice spoke in her ear. "Oh, Nadia, are you going in already?" Nadia looked up. Anne was on the ridge of the dune to the west, waving down at her, a black silhouette against a blood-colored sky. "That was the idea," Nadia said. "Come on up here just a second. I want you to see this sunset. It's going to be a good one. Come on, it'll only take a minute. You'll be glad you did it." There are clouds to the west. Nadia sighed and closed the outer lock door. The east face of the dune was steep. Nadia carefully stepped in the prints that Anne had made in her ascent. The sand there was packed and held firm most of the time. Near the crest it got steeper, and she leaned forward and dug in with her fingers. Then she was clambering onto the broad, rounded crest and could straighten up and have a look. This is making me really happy because there's some really cool sand dunes in Michigan. If you've never heard of them, Google it. But I know exactly what they're talking about. I would love to be sitting on a sand dune on Mars and watching a sunset with Anne and her geological preservation mindset. Anyways, Isada, thank you for 34 months. Starship hightailing it out of there after seeing Mars is already inhabited. Indeed. Yummy. Wow. It feels like much, much longer than that. Almost 4 years to the day? You're right. I didn't realize. Happy 4-year anniversary, babe. Sleeping Bear Sand Dunes, yeah. I haven't been there in a long time, but I hope that I can have a little vacation there sometime soon. And maybe stream. Maybe not a vacation. Maybe a streamcation. Which is a cross between a stream and an occasion. I have to pee. I'll be right back and we'll keep reading about sand dunes, I guess.